This is my favorite take so far, and it's not even close. What was the guy's name? You gotta hit me up, man, in the comments when this video drops.
Welcome to another episode of Into the West. With me today are Richard, and we have Andrew back on the podcast. And this is another community hot takes episode after the
Part
success of
two.
the last one. Yeah, part two. We were given so many more takes, and we just had to do another one. Before we get started, I just want to do a quick shout out of the sponsor of the video, Baron of Dice. They make some great Middle Earth SBG dice as well as dice for many other games. Go check out their products on their website. You can use our promo code WEST for 5% off your order. And also want to thank Mithril Brush Painting Competition for sponsoring this video. If you want more information on the competition, as well as how to enter and how to support the competition, just check out the link below. Also want to say that we're doing a Patreon promotion where after 1 month of signing up, we will be sending out 1 pack of dice.
Custom Into the West dice.
Yes. Also, a quick thank you to all of our patrons over on Patreon for supporting us. If you want to see extra content, see videos early, and other perks, please check out all of the perks in the link below. A special shout out to Ragin Ridge 83, the top supporter of the channel. The first one we have is from Lord of Nothing 22, who says, "Storm the camp is actually a decent scenario when your hero isn't a meat stick. If I have Denethor and a couple bolt throwers, I'm happy with the scenario."
What do we think a meat stick is? Like a beat stick or like a stick of beef?
Yes, you don't see that many meats on sticks.
Well, Andrew, you should know because whenever I send you a list, you're like, that's a thick list. So
All right, so just big beefy boys.
that's how I'm taking it anyway.
I think I'm torn on this one because the scenario I think is objectively bad, but I think like in a competitive setting, like you can actually have a good game and it could be like a pretty good competitive battle against your opponent. It's just not going to have anything to do with storming the camp. Like that never comes up in any game. It's unless you've got like Goblin Mercenaries, something like that, or Goblin Town, but it's definitely not a good scenario. So
Or
like
if you had 4 hours to play it out.
I just think like the first 3 turns, like full turns of both sides moving, especially if someone's not marching, just like scooching up, take a few bow shots, scooching up, take a few bow shots. I don't think anybody enjoys that. And then I think the gimmick of the scenario is usually what we get most excited about when it's good and most upset about when it's bad. And I feel like the gimmick of this scenario, it could be so awesome. Like season, like that sounds really cool. Like going and trying to take a spot, move your opponent off it sounds great. The courage thing in the camp, like the thought was there. It's just when you play the game, that's just not how it works out.
I love how he caveats it with his list of like spamming Avenger bolt throwers. Obviously, this guy doesn't care about his opponent's feelings at all. And or even has played this list in a tournament, because chances are if he played this at a tournament and he's coming up against a Justice Shooty army, or even an army that is really, really weak against shooting, there's a good chance that no one just makes the first move and it just becomes a draw.
It's fun if you don't care about your opponents having fun and you just like shooting them down. Then yeah, Storm the Camp's pretty perfect.
Totally agree.
Next take is from J Dalsop 9466, who says, "The warband army building system is confusing and bad."
So you guys play, this is my only edition. My understanding is in prior editions, you didn't have it, right? You could just kind of take whatever you wanted. Is that right?
Your army just needed 1 hero, so you can have Legolas and 1,000 elves if you have the points. So yes, it's probably more confusing than it was before, because before there were no rules, right? So having rules is more confusing than not having rules. But I think it's pretty easy to remember. You have the hero tiers, and then it tells you in the book how many they can lead, and you put warriors in a hero's warband. It seems pretty straightforward to me.
And I would argue that it's a good change. I think everything related to it, one once like you actually do learn the rules, I haven't heard a lot of players complain about it because it makes sense. No one just wants to play spam warriors, like people who have played the older edition where you're just playing a million like goblins and stuff. It's just not as exciting when you're having to play against like multiple heroes and named heroes that you know and love from the movies, right?
Yeah. At the end of the day, the game is about heroes. It's about the heroic stats and the effect heroes have on your army. And if your army is just saturated with warriors, it's not really the spirit of the game.
I think the heroes are what makes this game fun. To this person's credit, maybe they weren't the ones, right, with Legolas and 90 elves or something. They just said, hey, I just don't like this system, and maybe that's fair. But one thing that you guys didn't mention that I also really like is just you kind of have to think about what heroes you're going to take just for the warband slots, right? Like there could be a really great hero, and I really like the Spider Queen, but like I don't really want to take 15 giant spiders, right? Or if you do a single drop hero, it just adds kind of another dimension to the game that I really like, in addition to how it actually plays on the tabletop when you're list building. You might want to take a 600 point list that you really like and bring it up to 650, but you don't have the slots. So you got to kind of reevaluate your heroes. And I think that's fun.
Interested to hear from people who really don't like this system. Let us know what exactly about the warband system that you don't like. The next one is from a YouTube comment, and this might be a listener of Last Lines of Noobs and Men, but the take is that Ingold is a lot better than Hurin, mounted or on foot.
Wait, give us the name and shame.
It's user CPAEJ8IDY8Y.
Hiding behind anonymous.
Ingold is the like doesn't back away one, right?
Yeah, the fact that you needed to ask that kind of shows how often we see him. I mean, Hurin is great. You're right. He synergizes with a lot of Minas Tirith and fiefdom heroes, and you see him in list a lot. I think Ingold just he's kind of fallen off a little bit. And when he first was released, I saw some people take him. His defensive rules are pretty good, but the more Fight Five that's creeping up into like the new books, the new legions, the harder it is to use Fight Four heroes.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I also always wondered, like, first off, there was that like whole argument of how his rule actually worked, right? Like, does he never back away? Is he always trapped? Is he never trapped? I don't think he's bad, right? He's got a 3 might. Fight 4 is really rough, but 3 might, he's pretty cheap. He brings 12 guys.
They don't really play the same role, so it is hard to compare them. I know they came in the same blister, but I think a better comparison would be Irolas. To me, Irolas just brings a lot more utility and they're priced about the same. So I don't know. It's that's mainly why I wouldn't really ever take in gold, like because I would rate Irolas and Medril ahead of them.
Irolas does what Minas Tirith already does well, and he's at the same fight value as the troops, right? So I think a Hurin adds something different, right? Like +1 to wound. Thinking off the top of my head, I don't think any other heroes, unless you count Elisar, right? I don't think any other heroes on Minas Tirith get +1 to wound. So that's like
Maybe
unique
Faramir or
Fair with the
Boromir with the
lance,
wall.
yeah.
with the lance. That's true. I feel like you don't see those choices too often. You see Huron more often. And then on top of that, I just think the VP denial rule, like, yeah, your leader has to die, but I feel like that's going to happen sometimes, unfortunately, and like denying a couple of points. I think that's really cool. And he's also fight 5 and can take the horse. I totally
Also
agree
for
with you.
alliances, he's Hero Valor too.
Yeah, definitely different type of hero. I think like for what Minas Tirith is looking for, I like him better. I know there's people that like foot heroes better as well. So if that's the case, like, maybe that's a little bit of competition there. But yeah, that's kind of my take.
All right, next we have one from Lut Zekmeyer, and he says Angmar's perfectly balanced and does not need any nerfs. This is a little bit of a dated comment because this was before the information that we got a couple months ago where we're going to get potential buffs to Angmar, with likely buffs.
To be fair, we only know right now The addition so far that we know in Angmar is the stealing equipment or hero. And I wouldn't say that pushes Angmar over the top to be too good either.
It's just the trend so far when we see an army get a new book.
I don't think this is too hot of a take. I mean, it probably depends on who you talk to and which meta you're in. But I think most competitive players would recognize that Angmar is really, really good. Definitely a very competitive army. Probably one of the better ones that if you're going to play pure. But yeah, with the addition of the legendary legions, you don't hear a lot of people saying they're overtuned or asking for nerfs. Like even at the recent Nations Cup, which is a extremely competitive tournament as well, there there were Angmars, but it was not dominated by Angmars at all.
Angmar is one of the armies I feel like people complain about the most. So I think there's a perception that like maybe it's too powerful, but I just think it's because it's very unfun to play against. And so I think sometimes you might confuse those two things and just be like, well, you should just nerf this so it's not as good and I have more fun playing the game. But I agree with this. I think this is just a statement. I don't think anything needs to be nerfed. And you could count the Gulliver and Fellbeast kind of monster flying rules from last FAQ. And that was I mean, if you're playing against evil, that's a big nerf, right? I mean, being able to shoot into combat more easily and not being able to hide Gulliver behind in the ways. I think, that was maybe the quote unquote nerf to the list. But I think it's got clear weaknesses. It's got its strengths are maybe as strong as any strengths of any army in the game. And so I can see how that might, be viewed as something that needs to be nerfed. Very different type of army, but like the Dragon Legion does, you know, shield wall moving forward, just straight up combat, no tricks, no anything better than any other army in the game, right? And I think there's people that don't like playing against that, right? So I think it's probably more driven off of frustration to play against than the list actually being overpowered. If you don't know what you're doing or don't have a good answer to Gulliver, like you're just going to lose. It doesn't really matter who you're playing against, right? So that maybe I could see kind of where the take is hot, but I think it's just a statement.
Yeah. This next one has been mentioned and posted several times, so I feel like it needs to be covered. And it is that Legendary Legions should only be for narrative games and not in tournaments.
That's kind of hot.
That's a fairly hot one. What are we doing, by the way? We need to decide collectively what we're doing for like takes that we think are normal and not hot. Is it just like a piece of whole wheat toast?
It's the range from ice cube to barbecue wings,
Yeah, that's perfect.
buffalo wings.
So I think the idea of legendary legions was interesting. There are certainly some of them that I think you look at and be like, wow, this is like extremely well done. And this feels like what it's supposed to be. A couple ones that come to mind, Defenders of Helm's Deep, right? You cannot green ally that list as it normally stands. And it is a clear, like very famous, very popular part of the movie and books. Obviously, the elves weren't there in the books, but you get what I mean, right? And like people love that. They connect with that. It's great. Assault on Helm's Deep, same thing. I know it's been nerfed a million times, but that's like, okay, it is so different than normal Isengard or anything that you could create that it's really cool and it's really unique and it's a very specific moment in the movie. You could even argue, even though it's terrible, like Men of the West. Like that's a cool idea, right? I think to put together. I also like the Grand Army of the South. I think that one's really, really cool. I don't know. I think where they went wrong is they committed to the legendary legions and then they said, okay, like the only new content that we can produce is in the form of these legendary legions. And they just have some that are just, I don't want to be too harsh, but like lazy, right? Like the Dale Legion is lazy. We're going to give them all fearless. And I think that's literally it, right? It's just the same benefits from the regular army. So I don't like the ones where it's something you can already take. Coast of the Dragon Legion, you could just take that with Easterlings and you get all the same benefits, but then you just get a couple of things for free and you lose out on one hero that now nobody's ever going to take. So I like the idea, but I also think there are some legions that you should be able to play, maybe because they're not the most competitive, but because it's a cool combo that you can't do, at least with green alliances in the books as it stands.
My guess to why these takes are suggesting that they should only be narrative is perhaps referring to the overtuned legendary legions. And maybe some of the ones are more unfun, like Vanquishers before it was nerfed, Black Riders. To me, the problem isn't the fact that they're legendary legions, it's how they're designed. As Andrews pointed out, like there are really well designed legendary legions that are fun to play and also just good additions to the game. And then other ones that are memes that you don't really ever take or they're unfun. So there's a huge range, right? Not all legendary legions are at the same level.
Yeah, definitely agree with you guys. I think it's just about getting new content. I think it's really nice to have right now because the content, creation is so slow. But, if we continuously got new models, new like semi factions like Dunland to be added to existing factions, if like the yellow lines didn't get nerfed, then perhaps we wouldn't need legendary legions. But in the current state of the game, I'm happy we do have them.
All right, the next one is from OG Tomo. And it's a long paragraph, but to summarize, he's saying that the 1-to-1 ratio point for point efficiency comparisons players talk about in videos are wrong. I don't know if he's referring to us, but basically a hero should not be valued in what it can kill its points worth.
Oh, I absolutely love this take. This is my favorite take so far, and it's not even close. What was the guy's name? OG
OG
Tobo?
Tomo.
OG Tomo. You got to hit me up, man, in the comments when this video drops. Like, I'm here. I'm here to defend you to the end on this one. I don't know where you guys come out. I totally get the argument, and I get why players think like, don't take Aragorn LSR because he's not going to make 240 points back. Like, totally get the mental kind of thought behind it. But I feel like what you miss there is like if you have a Witch King, right? And your Witch King transfixes an opposing hero that's at or above his points value. That doesn't really get tracked in the making his points back, right? Because he's not killing the hero. And then maybe he kills 2 or 3 models, right, throughout the game, or a smaller hero later on, and it's like, my Witch King killed 50 points. It's like, well, the impact that he had on the game was 50 points plus stopping a 200-point model on the other side of the board. That's a very obvious and easy example. But another one is like, I always think about a Lake Town bowman, like a 6-point bowman going up against like, let's say Rivendell Knights or, Mahud, right? Something like that. And you just happen to get a shot and you kill a 20, 23-point model, right? With an archer. Like that archer made 4 times his points for the game. But it's like, that doesn't really tell you the value of that model or the value of that hero. You know what I mean? It's like, what is the impact overall that it's having on the game? And if a single hero, for example, lets your army of, maybe like Survivors of Lake Town, because that's what I play, lets them kill your opponent and break your opponent and you win the game, then who cares what the point differential was? I love this take. Again, I'm not saying that the thought process is completely flawed, but there are people, I'm sure you guys know, that it's like everything is how do I get my points back with this model, get my points back with this hero. And I just don't think it's the right way to think about it. Like I have heroes that I just put on the board to call 2 marches and a heroic move. How are you making your points back on that? You're not, but it's just a utility piece that gives you a lot of flexibility. And it also pigeonholes the thinking to like killing is the only thing important in this game, because that's kind of how you quote unquote make points back.
So I'm quite surprised, Andrew. I actually do disagree with this take, but I think I know what you're talking about, and you can let me know if we actually do agree here. I do like to do these rough calculations because it does give me a ballpark of what is overcosted, what is undercosted. Even if it's like there's a general opinion of what's good and bad, you can kind of make your own rough calculations. But I will say what you said makes sense. Not everything is valued with the fighting stats, because that is far from the most important thing in this game. The most important thing in this game often is movement. And a lot of the times I've seen players not factor in like a movement into these calculations, which I definitely do. So I would say I disagree with the take, but the part that I do agree is that like you you have to factor in the other stuff, out of combat stuff. So it might be more arbitrary, but for me at least, I can assign an arbitrary value that I believe is worth that. So, like you said, a heroic march, having the ability to heroic march, do I value that at 5 or 10 points in this like captain level hero? Maybe. Maybe I'll value it 20 points for like a big hero that is like a beat stick that can march, because those are rare. Right. So I wouldn't say it's like a science, but it's something that I think is a good exercise for you to make your own evaluations on these, and make these rough calculations to understand more, rather than even just listening to us and saying, oh, these guys, this YouTube channel said this model is good, this is overvalued, this is bad, right? If you really like heroic strike, find a way to implement like a rough estimation of how much that is worth to you in that list, and then you can kind of figure out how good that hero is.
I think that's all totally fair. I think a couple examples just to kind of summarize maybe what my new best friend is talking about, right? Is like I played Depths of Moria, as I told you guys, right? I just won a small local event with that army. We got a 350 point centerpiece model that never made anywhere close to that back. And I won all three of my games and took that tournament down, right? Now, that doesn't conflict with what you just said, Richard, because 12-inch fearless, army doesn't break. Like there's a ton of points values that you could assign those things. I think what this guy is saying is the 1-for-1 point value reconciliation, because he specifically mentioned that, right? And that's the part that I strongly agree with. Like, I've seen competitive players say, like, okay, if my, 150 point elf hero eats a transfix every turn from a Witch King, like, well, that's an even trade. Like I've heard that. I don't know if you guys have, and it's not an even trade. Like, but that's not even the point. but even the math doesn't work, because it's like, okay, so you have a hero that's doing nothing, and they have a hero that costs the same amount or a similar amount that is stopping your hero every turn and doing something else. Like a Witch King can still and go fight. So it's just a massive kind of trade-off. So this like the 1-for-1 thing doesn't really compute. If you want to say, Richard, like kind of what you're saying, I think that's a little bit more fair. Like, hey, Dane Ironfoot, he might not kill 160 points, but I'm going to assign 30 points of value to Fearless Army. I'm going to assign, 10 points of value to Master of Battle 4+. Like I can get on board with that a little bit more. And I think it probably helps you with list building, which is maybe what you're talking about. But I don't know, the 1-for-1, at least the way I hear most people talk about it, I think is just not the right way to think about it. Charles, you're the tiebreaker. Come on, me and OG Tomo.
I normally hate being the guy that's on the fence. I like to pick a side, but in this case, my answer is that it depends on the hero. Like some heroes, it's is easy to tell. Why you most of the time will pick a named captain over a generic, because the named captain gives more value, because how the game usually is you pay 5 points for a point of might, and in most cases, unless you're using the might to like boost a fate roll or something, it's going to have a bigger impact than 5 points. And so most of the time you do pick the hero that has the 3 might over the 2 might, because you're only paying 5 points for the extra point of might. I was going to actually use that Balrog example because I recently faced a Balrog at a tournament, and because the goblins never ran away, I lost the game. And so in that case, in that game, the fearless for the goblins was worth probably 50 over 100 points, maybe 200 points. It was literally the reason I lost. So maybe I'm on Andrew's side a little more here, but I think it still comes down to the hero. It's some heroes it is like point for point.
I think we got to change our names to OG Charles and OG Andrew just to fully cement this cement this take.
All right, so Next one is from Ashmorgan9972, who says trolls need a buff. It's a shame that such a great model range is completely ignored and they're not competitive at all. Maybe give them burly or an extra wound or blubbery mass.
I mean, could this be just the coldest take ever? Like, I don't think anyone here will argue that trolls are too good right now. But yes, I think we've talked about this in past episodes before. It would be great to see them in competitive games. All the current monsters, hero monsters that are viable right now are, really fun to add to an army, and they're great pieces, to think around, to play against, and to play with. So I'm all on board. Personally, I always felt the easiest way to do it is to add monster charge, because the biggest thing is the consistency of winning fights against warriors, and then also having a bit more, I guess, of a threat against heroes as well. So I think that kind of solves both.
I had another approach of how you can buff these guys, how like specifically non-hero monsters, and that is to make them sort of a wild card unit. So if you guys have ever played any video games like Battle for Middle Earth, when a troll or a monster is about to die, it has a chance of hurting the models around it. So something along those lines. Because right now, their main weakness is that a hero can just go into them in heroic strike, and there's nothing they can do about them. Most of them are completely useless against magic or Fellite or something. So giving them some kind of wild card where they can potentially hurt the models around them, and you risk a hero when you send in a hero to strike. Potentially they take a wound or something like that. That could be a way to make them more interesting. Just like this person suggested, I'll argue that the hot part of it is not to actually buff them in terms of stats, because I think that they'll still have the same weakness. Because just look at the Gundabad troll profile. It's beefier, it's stronger than a Mordor troll, but you wouldn't say it's more competitive. I don't think giving them stats is necessarily the way to do it. It's to give them another utility, maybe.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think just to add to your point, Charles, right? There's monsters. I think the ogre from Azog's Legion is what, like 55 points, if I remember, something around there.
Yeah. 60.
60 points.
And trust me, I tried. It's not good enough. It's one of the better monsters, but even I still don't think it's worth it.
Yeah, so that was gonna be my point, right? It's like you have monsters, they've tried from all points ranges, right? And it doesn't work at any points level, like lower stats, higher stats. So I totally agree with that, Charles. The only ones that really see play are cave trolls, because I think you get a smaller base size. You still don't see them often, but smaller base size makes a big difference. Because the brutal power attacks, I'm sure we all agree, are phenomenal. Like a really, really fun part of the game, and really competitive as well. But yeah, every points level it doesn't work. The only ones that see play are occasionally cave trolls, but not really. And then the ones with might and will, right? We don't talk about that enough either, right? Just like being able to resist a transfix every turn. The striking hero you mentioned, but a transfix every turn for your 100-point model doesn't help much either. And there's also a 100-point, the Goblin King's, I think, 130. And he's just a troll with, invulnerability and might and resistant to magic, right? So it's just the discrepancy is just way too large.
There's a lot that they can do to make trolls better. We'll have to see in the next edition. The next one is from Ryan Gale, and his take is that the stat line in this game should max at 12 instead of 10, so that there's a higher scale to assign, so that it's not just 1 to 10, to give more flexibility in game design. The example he gave was that Numenor, Warriors, and Survivors of Lake Town have the same defense.
The basic ones, defense, strength, and even attacks, wounds, I think those ones are fine. In that example, I think you could have easily just made Numenor D6 and no one would ever complain about it. And then maybe like Lake Town, one less defense, whatever, right? But I think the one that I would agree with Ryan here would be fight value, because I think it originally worked with 10, but the way that power creep or whatever you will, like with the new legions and everything, like with every release, the armies that up their fight value, there's more and more. And so it just feels less special. And that's why We used to have a fight 4 meta, and then now it's a fight 5 meta. And then fight 3 kind of counters fight 5 and fight 6, but if you can get the right numbers in fight 5, then it's not necessarily a hard counter. So I can kind of see it if it's spread out a little bit more up to 12, and then you have different levels of warriors, orcs, goblins, men of Rohan is a different tier. Minas Tirith is like one higher, that kind of scale. That might be more interesting with like more armies that maybe rock, paper, scissors, or don't feel like you're fighting the same matchup. So I think I would be down for that.
Next one is from Competente Tyler, and his take is that heroic channeling some spells should be better. Drain Courage and Black Dart, where when you channel it, it becomes D3 with a 33% chance that it's the same amount when you channel it. So his argument is that it should always be better when you channel because you're spending a might.
Yeah, shout out to Tyler from NorCal. Bad take. It's it's too logical. I agree 100%.
Next follow-up question, because I know my answer. Have either of you ever channeled a spell that is not blinding light?
Yeah, of course. I've I've channeled transfixed in late game situations.
I've channeled Fury before.
Not often, but I have channeled Flame Burst before.
Embers?
Yeah. I think maybe Tyler's point is that they're not all equally good. Like some of them are worth considering, while others it's like why is that an option? Like
And to Andrew's point, most of them are bad.
Well, I think where I'm going with this is I love the take, but it's not hot enough for me. You know what I mean? Like we got the sizzling pan, it's on the stove, but I want that like bacon crackle that like burns you when you go reach for it. You know what I mean? And
Extra crispy.
Respect to Tyler, but we just got to turn it up a little bit. I think heroic channeling is absolute garbage. I think it is one of the worst heroic actions in the entire game. And I think this because like the way you do it and the fact you have to call it before anything moves is just horrible. Like I feel like you should be able to, I know this breaks the game, but you'd have to find a way to make it work. You should be able to do it like when the caster starts moving. Because when are you gonna like channel Black Dart? That's not very efficient. When are you gonna do that? Like when are you gonna have an opportunity where you know for sure that you're gonna go first, maybe later in the game? You know that your target's going to be there, and then you're going to risk to D3, right? There's just too many variables for a competitive player to do that. Like you could lose a heroic move off. Your opponent could do that and then run away and be out of range. Like I just feel like there's so many ways it goes wrong that the only spells I can think that I've channeled besides the obvious ones like Fury and Blinding Light are Flame Burst on Kardouche, the Fire Caller once. And I was playing the Great Beast of Gorgoroth who had no will left. And I set it on like that's so specific, you know what I mean? So I really like the take. I think the entire mechanic of heroic channeling needs to be reworked.
I like to think a smart idea or a fun idea to make the change. If channel instead made it that you can cast even if you are charged into combat. So similar to the Vanquisher's rule, I think.
Yeah, that kind of like addresses the issue I was talking about. I think that's a cool idea.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Okay, so Andrew, you asked for a really hot take. Here's one for you. Ground 4 Miniatures on Instagram says they over nerfed shooting.
Again, I didn't play the last edition. I've heard Legend of Volley Fire, but I honestly don't really know what it is.
So I'll summarize the changes. So this actually goes back a couple editions. So there's the Volley Fire, which you've heard of. There was also uh, they didn't have a -1 when you move, so you can move and shoot at 100 same accuracy. Throwing weapons were 1 point instead of 2 points. So those are huge
Yeah.
changes. I think that this take typically comes from maybe more narrative players, where if you were to go for the most realistic game possible, maybe shooting is a little weak. You don't have situations come up that often where an army gets shot off the board, where like maybe in an actual battle it could happen. So I get the take, but I think from just to make the game playable and actually not like super unfun in a tournament setting, I think it's good where it is. I mean, Richards argued that it should be nerfed even more.
I'm just someone who like wouldn't be sad at all if like shooting was nerfed to the ground as it is, and it could like, maybe everything shooting is like strength 1.
I definitely think that it shouldn't be better than it is right now.
Yeah, look, I think like you can argue for sure, like how realistic is it that I'm hitting someone with an arrow and they're not dying? Like that part I get, right? And if you look at the math, right, it is very unlikely, even if you fired 10 shots right into D5 or D6, that you're gonna you get like 1 kill maybe per turn, and maybe that doesn't make sense from a realism standpoint. But I think I totally disagree with this take. I didn't play in the other editions, but if you guys have played any other games, I've never played 40K, but that's like a common thing you hear is like whoever against certain armies, right? Whoever loses the roll off for turn 1 packs up their bags and, goes to the bar. Like, that's not what I want when I'm playing this game. And I think we've all had games, even under the current rules, where we've gotten not quite shot off the board, but oh man, my opponent high rolled shooting. And to me, it's like maybe the worst feeling in this game because there's nothing you can do about it. You just got to sit there and take it. You can put obstacles in the way, right? And get in the ways. But I just, it's not a fun play experience for either player, I don't think. I've heard stories of competitive players who felt like they were even in the shooting war, shooting at each other for a couple turns. Okay, you got a little bit better rolls. You killed a couple of my archers. I guess I'm going to charge in now. Like, that's not the type of game that I want. So I agree that if you want it to be more realistic, maybe it should be buffed a little bit. But I like that it serves a purpose in the game, which is like, okay, I've got more shooting. You're going to come to me and we're going to fight over here and I'll kill 3 or 4 of your guys before that happens. I think that's fine.
Yeah, shoot phase is probably the least engaging phase of the game. So I think the game is all about the combats and the moves.
And I think to be fair, right, like for this take, you can take a full archery army, right, with the legions we have. You want to take the Rangers of Mirkwood at lower points, like that's actually pretty scary. We had that win a local event in Jersey, 3 rounds. Rangers of Athelion, some people took that to Adepticon. I don't think it's very good because shooting is not the best. But if you want to play that play style, you can. You can play Corsairs. You can, so that's kind of another counterpoint is if you really want to continue to play that way, you can. It's not as good, but it's still an option.
I think we need to end off with a good one. So I know Andrew's made comments about this offline before, so now is your chance to let it out. And it is from our friend over at the Durin show, Marcus. And his take is that Durin is not a meme tier hero. He's good enough that you would name a podcast after him.
Wait, is that actually part of the comment, or is that your
That is a comment to his comment.
I don't think I've ever played a game against Durin before. I'm only looking at it on paper, and on paper, like, do I think he's the worst hero in the game? No. But do I think he's great? Also, no. Like, I feel like there's enough stuff that counters him, but a D9 hero, right? He's got the horn. I mean, he's got some tools. I mean, meme tier, when I hear meme tier, that's like worst heroes in the game, right? Like you never see them at all. So I guess I agree with my buddy Marcus on that one a little bit.
I don't think he's being super serious. Obviously, they are big fans of this hero, and we had an extensive debate with your friend Andrew Alisher, who came on the show when we did a tier list of Khazad-dûm, and he had said that it's one of his favorite heroes, and he thinks it's one of the top heroes of the game. And so I just find it really interesting because even though recently, Adepticon, we saw that in one of the top lists had a Durin in it. I don't know if it's actually changed my mind.
Yeah, well, I mean, you got to think about Charles, like, where you're getting your information from, right? Like, I think if you had given me a more credible source, I might kind of buy into it. But the fact that Alisher says it's a top 5 hero, I mean, that doesn't really hold any kind of water to me. think he's won a couple tournaments, right? I mean, it just doesn't really add up to me.
I thought we were friends.
Look, I think a guy like Marcus, right? He says it's not meme tier, and I listen. You know what I mean? So I I think he's firmly like average, right? I think we all have our pet heroes that we love that we think are maybe better than they are because we've got good experiences playing with them, and maybe it worked out well for us. But my counterpoint is always, take Durin to Articon, take Durin to Adepticon, and let's see how good he is.
Yeah, I like it. I think that's a good spot to end. I think Charles and I have talked enough about Durin. So it was mostly just for you, Andrew.
I appreciate you guys.
That's all the hot takes we're covering today. If you're interested in seeing more, please leave your hot takes down below. And thanks, Andrew, for joining us for this segment. And thank you all for watching. Look forward to the next episode of Into the West.